The silent drift of thought. Most people believe their life is shaped by the decisions they make, but James Allen warned that long before a decision is ever reached, something quieter has already taken control. Not choice, not action, but direction. Thoughts that repeat without notice begin to steer the mind, and what steers the mind eventually steers the life. This process is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with conflict or emotion. It happens silently. A small idea accepted without resistance. A belief carried forward simply because it has always been there. A way of thinking that feels harmless because it is familiar. James Allen wrote that character is not shaped in moments of crisis, but in the unseen hours of ordinary thinking. What the mind returns to, again and again, becomes its path. And most people do not realize they are drifting until they look up and find themselves far from where they intended to be. This drift does not require effort. It only requires inattention. The mind, left unguided, moves along the grooves it already knows, and over time, those grooves deepen. A repeated thought becomes a habit becomes a tendency becomes a direction, and direction, sustained long enough, becomes destiny. James Allen did not teach that people are trapped by fate. He taught that people are guided by what they allow to pass unexamined. Every day, the mind quietly votes for the future, not through dramatic decisions, but through the thoughts it permits to remain. This is why two people can live under the same conditions, face the same challenges, and arrive at entirely different outcomes. The difference is not circumstance. It is the unseen current of thought beneath the surface. In this session, we are not concerned with changing behavior. We are not concerned with forcing discipline or motivation. We are concerned with awareness, because once the direction of thought is seen, it can no longer move unchecked. And when the drift becomes visible, choice quietly returns. Thought rarely announces its direction loudly. More often it moves in quiet increments, subtle preferences, small allowances, unquestioned habits of attention. A mind does not suddenly lose its way. It drifts. And drift is dangerous not because it is dramatic, but because it is unnoticed. James Allen taught that thought is always moving, either toward clarity or away from it. There is no stillness in the mental world, only direction. What we repeatedly dwell upon, even in passing, begins to shape our inner atmosphere. Ideas entertained without resistance sink quietly into belief. Belief, repeated often enough, hardens into character. This is not a punishment, it is a law. Just as water follows the path of least resistance, so thought follows the grooves it has worn for itself. The mind becomes familiar with certain tones: worry, self-doubt, resentment, restlessness, and familiarity is mistaken for truth. But the moment awareness enters, the drift slows. You begin to see not only what you think, but where it is taking you. This is the turning point James Allen emphasized. Not force, not suppression, but observation. When thought is seen clearly, it loses its power to carry you unconsciously. Choice returns, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, steadily, with intention. And from that point forward, the mind is no longer a passenger. It becomes a steward. If you've ever looked back on a week and wondered where it went, this is why. Thought rarely announces its direction loudly. More often, it drifts, quietly, steadily, with intention. And from that point forward, the mind is no longer a passenger. It becomes a steward. James Allen's warning was not dramatic. It was precise. Small, repeated thoughts become the hidden architects of your days. Not because they are powerful once, because they are powerful repeatedly. A single thought feels harmless, but a thought returned to, day after day, becomes a mood, and a mood returned to becomes a temperament, and temperament, repeated long enough, becomes a life. That is the silent drift. You don't wake up one morning with a different destiny. You wake up with the accumulated direction of your inner world. So the real question is not, what do I want? The real question is, what do I keep returning to when no one is watching? Because what you return to is what you rehearse, and what you rehearse is what you become familiar with. and what becomes familiar begins to feel like you. This is how a person can live inside a pattern and call it identity. This is how someone can say, "That's just how I am," when it is simply what they have practiced. But here is the turning point. The moment you notice the drift, you are no longer fully inside it. Awareness creates distance, and distance creates choice. Not a loud, heroic choice, a quiet one, a small interruption, a gentle redirection, a pause where you would normally react, a breath where you would normally spiral, a question where you would normally obey the old script. And this is important. You do not need to fight every thought. You only need to stop feeding the ones that lead you away from the life you want, because thoughts are like paths. The more often you walk them, the easier they become to enter. The less often you walk them, the more they fade. So if your mind keeps returning to worry, it is not proof that danger is near. It is proof that worry has become a well-worn road. If your mind keeps returning to criticism, it is not proof that you are failing. It is proof that criticism has become familiar. And if your mind keeps returning to self-respect, to patience, to steady courage, that too becomes familiar. This is why James Allen spoke so often about the inner life. Because the outer life is not separate from it. Your actions follow your dominant thoughts the way a shadow follows a body. When the inner world is hurried, the outer world becomes rushed. When the inner world is hostile, the outer world becomes strained. When the inner world is ordered, the outer world begins to arrange itself around that order. So the practice is simple, not easy, but simple. Begin to notice what your mind returns to. Notice the first few seconds after you wake. Notice what you reach for when you feel pressure. Notice what you tell yourself when something goes wrong. And when you see the drift, do not judge yourself. Just name it. This is the old road. This is the familiar pattern. This is where my mind has been trained to go. Then choose gently to return to what strengthens you. A calmer thought, a truer thought, a thought that creates dignity instead of chaos. Not because you are pretending everything is fine, but because you are refusing to be dragged by what is unconscious. And the more often you do this, the more your mind begins to trust the new direction. At first, it feels artificial. At first, it feels slow. But eventually, it becomes natural, because repetition is how the mind learns. This is the quiet power you are building, the power to guide your inner life, so your outer life stops drifting. And once that begins, change doesn't feel like force. It feels like alignment. It feels like returning to yourself, the self you were meant to become before the drift decided for you. There is a reason this work feels subtle. Real change does not arrive as a breakthrough moment. It arrives as a shift in what you no longer tolerate inside your own mind. Most people believe discipline is about forcing action. But James Allen understood something deeper. Discipline begins before action ever appears. It begins with permission. Every thought you allow to remain unquestioned is a thought you have quietly given authority. Not authority all at once. Authority through repetition. This is why the mind prefers familiar patterns, even painful ones. Familiarity feels safer than uncertainty. The known feels more predictable than the unknown, even when the known is limiting. So the mind repeats what it already understands. The same worry, the same resentment, the same quiet self-doubt. Not because it wants to harm you, but because it has learned that this is home. But here is the shift. You are not required to evict every unwanted thought. You are only required to stop treating them as instructions. A thought is a suggestion, nothing more. It gains power only when it is followed. This is where most people lose awareness. They believe the presence of a thought means obedience is required, but awareness breaks that illusion. You can notice a thought without agreeing with it. You can hear a fear without obeying it. You can feel resistance without surrendering to it. This is not denial. This is maturity of mind. And the moment this becomes clear, your relationship with thought changes. Instead of asking, "Is this thought true?" you begin asking, "Where does this thought lead?" Because the value of a thought is not in how convincing it sounds, but in the direction it moves your life. Some thoughts narrow you. They tighten the body. They rush the breath. They shrink the future into threat. Other thoughts steady you. They create space. They slow reaction. They invite clarity. Both types may feel equally real, but only one type builds a life worth living. James Allen wrote that serenity is not escape from difficulty, but mastery within it. And mastery begins when the mind is trained to pause. A pause before reaction. A pause before judgment. A pause before the old pattern completes itself. That pause is not weakness, it is the most powerful moment you have. Because within that pause, you reclaim authorship. You are no longer being pulled forward by habit. You are choosing direction. This is how character is formed. Not through grand decisions, but through thousands of quiet refusals to drift, refusing to indulge resentment, refusing to rehearse defeat, refusing to let fear narrate the future, and in their place, you introduce steadier companions. Patience, self-respect, clarity, resolve. Not forced, practiced. At first, the mind resists. It prefers the old roads, but repetition changes what feels natural. What once felt effortful becomes familiar. What once felt unfamiliar becomes home. This is how thought reshapes destiny, not through intensity, but through loyalty to direction. So if progress feels slow, that is not failure, that is training. If awareness feels tiring, that is not weakness, that is growth. You are doing the quiet work, the unseen work, the work that does not announce itself, but changes everything that follows. And the more you practice this awareness, the more you will notice something subtle but unmistakable. Life begins to respond differently, not because the world has changed, but because the mind meeting it has. And from that point forward, you are no longer drifting through your days. You are walking them with intention. As awareness strengthens, something important becomes clear. You begin to see that most suffering is not created by events, but by the internal commentary that follows them. The event happens once. The commentary repeats it endlessly. A conversation, a mistake, a disappointment. The moment passes, but the mind replays it, reshapes it, and then lives inside the echo. James Allen warned of this subtle trap. He understood that the mind, left unexamined, will turn moments into identities. A failure becomes, I am failing. A delay becomes, I am behind. A challenge becomes, this will never change. None of these statements are facts. They are interpretations. And interpretations, when repeated, become beliefs. This is where awareness does its quiet work, not by arguing with the mind, but by separating observation from identification. You are not the thought. You are the one who notices it. That distinction alone creates distance, and distance creates choice. When a thought arises and says, this always happens to me, awareness asks, always? When the mind insists, I can't change, awareness asks, is that true now, or is it memory speaking? Most thoughts are recycled impressions from the past, trying to predict the future. They are not warnings, they are habits. Once this is seen, the emotional charge begins to loosen. You stop reacting automatically. You stop feeding every impulse with attention. And slowly, the mind learns that not every signal requires response. This is the beginning of inner authority, not control, authority. Control fights the mind. Authority guides it. Authority says, I hear you, but I decide. Over time, this changes the tone of your inner world. Urgency softens. Judgment weakens. The need to rush dissolves. You become less reactive, not because life has become easier, but because you have become steadier. This steadiness does something remarkable. It restores proportion. Small problems stop feeling catastrophic. Temporary discomfort stops feeling permanent. Uncertainty stops feeling like danger. You begin to meet life as it is, instead of as the mind predicts it will be. James Allen wrote that calmness of mind is one of the beautiful jewels of wisdom, not because it avoids storms, but because it allows navigation through them. Calmness is not passive. It is alert, without tension. It is the ability to remain present without collapsing into fear or impatience. And presence is powerful, because when you are present, you see options you could not see while reacting. You hear nuance instead of threat. You respond with clarity instead of reflex. This is how the quality of thought reshapes experience. The outer world may look the same, but the inner posture has changed, and that change alters every outcome that follows. Decisions become cleaner, actions become simpler, regret loses its grip. You are no longer dragged forward by momentum, you are moving deliberately. This is not something that happens overnight. It is built through repetition, through noticing, through pausing, through choosing again. Each moment of awareness is a vote for direction, a vote for character, a vote for the life you are quietly shaping. And though the world may never notice this work, its effects are unmistakable, because the person who governs their thoughts eventually governs their path, not by force, not by struggle, but by understanding. As this understanding deepens, a subtle shift takes place. You begin to recognize that thoughts are not commands, they are suggestions, and suggestions only have power when they are believed. Most people never question the voice in their head. They assume it is accurate. They assume it is them. But awareness reveals something different. The mind speaks in patterns. It repeats what it has learned. It echoes what has been reinforced. Fear repeats fear. Doubt repeats doubt. Confidence repeats confidence. This is not destiny. It is conditioning. James Allen understood that character is not formed by circumstance, but by the habitual direction of thought. What you repeatedly think, you eventually become familiar with. What becomes familiar becomes comfortable, and what is comfortable is rarely questioned. This is why change feels difficult, not because it is impossible, but because it challenges familiarity. The mind prefers the known, even when the known is limiting. Awareness interrupts this loop. It introduces a pause between stimulus and response, and in that pause, a new option appears. Instead of reacting, you observe. Instead of assuming, you inquire. You begin to ask different questions. Is this thought useful? Is it true? Is it aligned with the direction I want to move? Not every thought deserves engagement. Some deserve nothing more than acknowledgement. Seen, not followed. As this becomes practice, mental noise begins to quiet. Not completely, but enough to hear something else. Clarity. Clarity does not shout. It speaks calmly. It does not pressure. It invites. When clarity replaces urgency, decisions improve. You stop rushing to escape discomfort. You stop mistaking movement for progress. You stop acting from fear disguised as necessity. Instead, you act from alignment. This alignment creates internal consistency. What you think, what you choose, and what you do begin to cooperate rather than compete. This cooperation builds trust, not with others, but with yourself. You begin to trust your responses. You trust your timing. You trust your ability to remain steady when uncertainty appears, and uncertainty will always appear. Life does not become predictable, but your relationship to it becomes grounded. James Allen believed that strength grows from composure, that power flows from self-mastery, not domination over others, but harmony within. This harmony changes how you carry yourself, how you speak, how you listen. People may not know why, but they feel it. There is less friction around you, less resistance, less unnecessary struggle, because inner conflict has softened. This does not mean you avoid challenge. It means you meet it without internal collapse. You stay upright in moments that once destabilized you. You remain present where you once withdrew. You choose deliberately where you once reacted automatically. This is the quiet architecture of transformation. No dramatic overhaul, no forced optimism, just steady awareness applied again and again. And with each application, the mind learns a new rhythm, a rhythm guided by understanding rather than impulse. This is how thought becomes disciplined, not through suppression, but through insight. And insight, once gained, does not disappear. It becomes part of how you see. And once the direction of thought is seen clearly, it can never again move you blindly. At this point, something important becomes clear. The work is not about controlling every thought. That would be impossible. The work is about choosing which thoughts you live from. James Allen never taught domination of the mind. He taught stewardship. A gardener does not argue with weeds. He removes what does not belong and nourishes what does. In the same way, you begin to recognize which thoughts deserve cultivation and which can be left behind without conflict. This is not suppression. It is discernment. You stop giving equal weight to every inner voice. You stop treating doubt as wisdom and fear as guidance. Instead, you begin to trust awareness itself. Awareness sees without panic. It observes without judgment. It responds without urgency. From this position, life feels less like something happening to you and more like something unfolding with you. You are no longer pulled forward by impulse or dragged backward by habit. You stand at the center. This does not mean you always feel confident. It means confidence is no longer required to act wisely. You can feel uncertain and still move deliberately. You can feel pressure and still remain composed. This is inner authority, and inner authority cannot be taken because it is not granted by circumstance. It is earned through understanding. Over time, this understanding reshapes identity. You stop defining yourself by moods. You stop identifying with passing thoughts. You stop measuring your worth by temporary outcomes. You begin to identify with steadiness, with clarity, with intention. James Allen believed that destiny is not something awaited, but something built, quietly, gradually, from within. Every sustained direction of thought leaves an imprint. Every choice reinforces a pattern. Every pattern becomes a pathway. And eventually, those pathways determine the landscape of your life, not by force, not by chance, but by alignment. This is why the smallest shifts matter. A single moment of awareness, a single paused reaction, a single redirected thought. These are not insignificant, they are foundational, because once the inner direction changes, the outer experience must follow. Not immediately, not dramatically, but inevitably. So the question is no longer, how do I change my life? The question becomes, what direction am I repeatedly thinking in? And once that question is asked honestly, the answer begins the transformation. You do not need to rush. You do not need to struggle. Awareness is already present. Choice is already available. All that remains is the willingness to see, and once seen, to choose with intention. This is the discipline James Allen spoke of. Not harsh, not rigid, but calm, deliberate, enduring. A life shaped from within by thought made conscious. And in that consciousness, you discover something quietly powerful. You were never meant to be driven by your thoughts. You were meant to guide them.